They cooked without credit. They created without recognition. They fed presidents, generals, and entire nations while history quietly erased their names from every recipe card and every cookbook page. But food has a memory that outlasts silence. Flavors carry ancestry in ways that words never can. And the truth, no matter how long it gets buried, always finds its way back to the surface. Today we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most extraordinary untold stories in all of American history. The story of black women who did not simply cook food, they invented it. They transformed raw ingredients into cultural revolutions. They built flavors so powerful, so deeply rooted in genius and necessity and love, that they became the very backbone of American cuisine and spread across the globe to change the way human beings on every continent eat. You have almost certainly eaten something today that traces its origin directly back to a black woman's hands. You just never knew her name. That ends right now. These are 10 foods black women invented that changed everything. And by the time we reach the end of this list, you will never look at your plate the same way again. Stay with us through every single entry because the last one will genuinely surprise you. And we will share something important at the very end about how you can honor this legacy in your own kitchen starting today. These are not stories about side dishes. These are stories about power, about memory, about the specific kind of brilliance that blooms when human beings are forced to create without resources, without recognition, and without rest. Number 10, sweet potato pie. Before there was pumpkin spice and before there were bakery windows filled with seasonal tarts, there was a woman crouched over a wood-burning stove in the American South, coaxing something extraordinary from a root that survived in the earth when almost nothing else would. Sweet potato pie is not simply a dessert. It is a document of survival. The sweet potato itself arrived in the American South through the Columbian Exchange and flourished in the same brutal heat that defined plantation life. Enslaved black women who were forced to feed entire households with whatever grew in the least desirable soil recognized the sweet potato's potential long before any formal cookbook acknowledged it. They roasted it, mashed it, sweetened it with molasses and cane sugar, seasoned it with cinnamon and nutmeg, and a pinch of something they kept in their apron pockets and never wrote down. And they poured that mixture into a buttery crust and changed dessert forever. Abby Fisher, a formerly enslaved black woman who eventually became one of San Francisco's most celebrated caterers in the 1880s, published what is now considered one of the earliest cookbooks authored by a black woman in American history. Her sweet potato pie recipe was not a novelty. It was a refined articulation of something black women had been perfecting for generations before her. What Abby Fisher documented was a living culinary tradition, one transmitted through kitchens and family gatherings and church suppers across the South for decades before a single word of it appeared in print. The dish moved north during the Great Migration, carrying with it the memory of every kitchen where it was first born. Today it sits at every Thanksgiving table that understands where the real feast comes from. Number 9, gumbo. There is no dish more emblematic of American culinary identity than gumbo, and there is no gumbo without the black women who built it from the ground up using knowledge that traveled across an ocean in the most horrific circumstances imaginable. The story of gumbo begins in West Africa, where okra was not just an ingredient, but a sacred crop. When enslaved Africans were torn from their homelands and brought to Louisiana, they carried seeds, literally. Historians have documented cases of enslaved women braiding okra seeds into their hair before boarding slave ships, understanding instinctively that food knowledge was a form of power and survival that no one could physically take from them. In Louisiana, those seeds became the backbone of a dish that absorbed everything around it. The French roux technique, the Spanish sofrito influence, the Choctaw filet powder. But the beating heart of gumbo, the okra that thickens the broth and gives the dish its name from the Bantu word for okra, that came from enslaved black women who transformed their grief and their genius into something that would eventually be recognized as the official state cuisine of Louisiana. Leah Chase, known throughout the world as the Queen of Creole Cuisine, spent decades refining and elevating the gumbo tradition in New Orleans at Dookie Chase's restaurant. She served it to civil rights leaders. She served it to presidents. She changed its flavor profile in ways that became the new standard. She also reportedly made President Barack Obama put down his hot sauce before she would allow him to touch her gumbo. That is a woman who understood the sacred nature of what she had built. Number 8, fried chicken. Let us be honest about something that the food industry has never been fully honest about. The fried chicken that built a global fast food empire worth hundreds of billions of dollars was not invented in a corporate kitchen by a white colonel in Kentucky. It was perfected in the kitchens and roadside stands and Sunday afternoon yards of black women across the American South who had been frying chicken in seasoned cast iron for generations before anyone thought to franchise it. The technique itself has roots in both West African and Scottish culinary traditions, but it was black women who synthesized those influences into the specific method that defines fried chicken as the world knows it today. The seasoning of the flour, the double dredge, the cast iron at precisely the right temperature, the rest time after frying that locks the juices in. These were not accidents. These were hard-won technical discoveries developed by women like Leah Chase and the countless unnamed women who sold fried chicken from baskets and trays at train stations across the South during the era of segregation, earning their own income in a world that offered them almost no other avenue for economic independence. When KFC was founded in the 1950s and when every fast food chain that followed built their menus around fried chicken, they were building on a foundation they did not lay and would not credit. The original recipe was already perfect. Black women made sure of that. The entire global fried chicken economy, the drive-thrus and the delivery apps and the celebrity chef spin-offs, and the fast casual chains that charge $20 for what grandmothers made for cents. All of it rests on an intellectual tradition that was never compensated and still has not been fully acknowledged. Number 7, Hoppin' John. On New Year's Day across the American South, millions of people eat black-eyed peas cooked with rice and seasoned pork, believing it will bring prosperity in the year ahead. They call it Hoppin' John. Very few of them know that this tradition, both the dish itself and the ritual meaning attached to it, was created and preserved almost entirely by Gula Geechee women, the descendants of enslaved Africans from the rice-growing regions of West Africa, who settled the sea islands of South Carolina and Georgia and maintained a distinct culture that survived long after slavery ended. Black-eyed peas were brought to the Americas by enslaved Africans who recognized in them a crop from home. The Gullah women who cooked them transformed them into a dish that carried specific cultural memories. The black-eyed pea represented luck and prosperity in West African tradition. The rice represented their agricultural heritage and expertise because it was actually gula, knowledge of rice cultivation, not European farming methods, that made the Carolina rice economy viable in the first place. Hoppin' John is a dish that smuggled an entire spiritual and agricultural tradition through the keyhole of American history. Every New Year's table that holds a bowl of it is, whether the people around it know it or not, honoring the genius of Gula Geechee, women who refuse to let their culture die. Number 6, banana pudding. Walk into any church potluck in the American South. Walk into any family reunion from Georgia to Tennessee to Mississippi to the Carolinas. You will find it on the table, creamy and layered, and somehow managing to taste like Sunday afternoon itself. Banana pudding as Americans know it. That specific architecture of vanilla wafers and sliced bananas and silky custard and cloud-like meringue or whipped cream on top was not something that emerged from a corporate test kitchen. It was developed incrementally by black women home cooks over decades, each one refining the technique of the woman who came before her. Each one adding something that would be passed down without being written down. The banana itself only became affordable and widely available in American kitchens in the late 19th century, and black women were among the first home cooks to fully explore what it could do in a dessert context. The layering method, the choice to use a vanilla wafer cookie specifically for both texture and flavor contrast, the patience required to make a proper cooked custard from scratch. These are culinary decisions that reflect serious technical skill. Southern food historians have traced the specific construction of the dish through black family recipe traditions that predate any published mainstream cookbook version. The knowledge lived in muscle memory and in the confident hands of women who had made it so many times they no longer needed to measure anything. What Magnolia Bakery eventually made famous in New York City was a version of something black grandmothers had been serving from Pyrex dishes since long before anyone thought to put it in a storefront window. Number 5, red velvet cake. The mythology around red velvet cake is surprisingly contested, with some accounts crediting the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York and others crediting Adams Extract Company for popularizing the use of red food coloring in cake batter. But the actual development of a moist, deep crimson chocolate cake with that specific velvety crumb texture and its iconic cream cheese or ermine frosting was shaped significantly by black women bakers in the American South who were already working with natural red pigments long before synthetic food dye entered the picture. The original red color in a velvet cake came from a chemical reaction between natural cocoa powder, which contained more anthocyanins before Dutch processing became standard, and the acidic buttermilk and vinegar in the batter. Black women bakers working in southern kitchens understood this reaction intuitively and used it to create a cake with a distinctly different texture and flavor from standard chocolate cake. The cream cheese frosting that now defines the dish was adopted and popularized through black bakery culture and spread through church bake sales and family celebrations until it became inseparable from the cake itself. By the time red velvet cake exploded into mainstream American consciousness in the early 2000s, it had already been a staple of black southern baking tradition for most of the 20th century. Every bakery that now charges $12 a slice is selling something that was perfected by women whose names never appeared on a menu. Number 4, cornbread. Nothing about cornbread is simple, and nothing about its history is straightforward. What looks like a basic quick bread made from cornmeal and a handful of pantry ingredients is actually the product of thousands of years of indigenous agricultural knowledge, 3 centuries of African culinary genius, and the specific ingenuity of black women who turned a food of poverty and necessity into something that became genuinely irreplaceable on the American table. The original corn cultivation was entirely the work of indigenous peoples of the Americas, but it was enslaved black women who developed the specific preparations, the cast iron skillet cornbread with its crispy edges and moist center, the hot water cornbread fried in a pan, the corn pone cooked directly on a griddle, that became the foundation of Southern cooking as the world knows it. Harriet Jacobs, who wrote extensively about her experience as an enslaved woman before escaping to freedom, described in vivid detail the food work that black women performed, including the constant grinding and preparation of corn into meal. That labor was not simple domestic service. It was culinary engineering performed without tools, without proper kitchens, and under conditions of violence and deprivation. The cornbread that now accompanies every bowl of chili and every pot of beans and every plate of greens in America exists because black women found ways to make it extraordinary despite everything designed to make their lives impossible. And the different regional variations, The skillet style of the Deep South versus the sweeter Northern cornbread versus the dense corn pone of Appalachian tradition, all of them reflect specific local Black women's adaptations of the core technique passed down through communities that had no other way to preserve the knowledge. Number 3, hot sauce. The global hot sauce industry is currently worth more than $4 billion annually. It shows up in fine dining restaurants and fast food chains and on the tables of households in more than 100 countries. The sriracha craze and the buffalo wing phenomenon and the artisan pepper sauce movement that fills farmers' market tables every weekend, all of it traces back to a much older tradition of fermented and preserved pepper sauces that Black women in the American South and the Caribbean developed as both a flavoring technique and a preservation method when refrigeration was not available, and bold flavor was one of the few luxuries accessible in a world of scarcity. West African cooking had long incorporated fiery peppers as a central flavor element, and enslaved Black women brought that understanding with them and applied it to the peppers they found in the American South and the Caribbean. The technique of macerating peppers in vinegar, allowing them to ferment, and using the resulting liquid as both a condiment and a cooking ingredient was developed and refined in Black kitchens long before any commercial hot sauce brand existed. Tabasco, which is the oldest commercially produced hot sauce in the United States, was created in Louisiana, a state whose cuisine was built by Black hands. The specific culture of treating hot sauce as an essential condiment, rather than a novelty item, of carrying it in a purse, of adding it to everything from eggs to greens to fried chicken, is a Black cultural practice that the rest of the world eventually adopted and decided to sell back at $4 a bottle. The food industry built an entire category on this tradition and named almost none of the women who built it first. Number 2, peach cobbler. There is a particular kind of genius involved in taking fruit that is on the edge of being too ripe, flour and butter and sugar in whatever quantities happen to be available, a cast iron skillet, a wood fire, and turning all of that into something that makes people close their eyes when they take the first bite. Peach cobbler is that genius, and it was developed by Black women in the American South who understood not just how to cook, but how to transform. The cobbler as a dish format arrived in the American colonies as a practical adaptation, a way of making something resembling a baked fruit pie when the proper tools and ingredients for a true pie were not available. But the specific combination of fresh southern peaches with a biscuit-style topping, the decision about how much cinnamon and nutmeg to add, the technique of allowing the fruit juices to bubble up and caramelize around the edges of the dough. These refinements were developed in Black kitchens and passed down through generations of Black women who cooked for both their own families and for the white households that employed them under conditions of slavery and later under the exploitative domestic labor arrangements that followed. The tragedy embedded in peach cobbler's history is that the women who perfected it often served it in dining rooms they were not allowed to sit in, to families whose names are recorded in history, while their own names were not. Every peach cobbler served today carries that weight, and it deserves to be acknowledged. Number 1, the Sunday dinner itself. This may not seem like a single food, but hear this out, because the Sunday dinner tradition as Black America built it is one of the most significant culinary inventions in the history of this country, and it deserves the top spot on this list. After the Civil War, when formerly enslaved Black people entered a society that was violently hostile to their freedom and their advancement, Black women organized their kitchens into something extraordinary. Sunday dinner became both a meal and an institution. It was the one day when families gathered, when the table was set with the best dishes, when every technique and every flavor tradition that had survived the Middle Passage and the brutality of slavery and the ongoing violence of Reconstruction was expressed in full. Fried chicken, collard greens cooked low and slow with smoked pork. Mac and cheese baked until the top was golden. Cornbread still hot from the oven. Sweet potato pie cooling on the windowsill. Banana pudding already set in the icebox. Peach cobbler waiting for dessert. Black women did not just cook these dishes. They curated them into an experience that preserved cultural memory, fed community bonds, and transmitted knowledge across generations without needing a single written recipe. Edna Lewis, the legendary chef and food writer who grew up in the all-black community of Freetown, Virginia, spent her career documenting this tradition and explaining to the wider culinary world what Southern food actually was and where it actually came from. Her book, The Taste of Country Cooking, published in 1976, is now considered one of the most important culinary texts in American history. She described the Sunday dinner table not as a collection of recipes, but as a living document of a people's survival and joy. That document was written by Black women every single week for more than a century before anyone outside the community began to pay attention. And now, here is what history never wants to fully admit. Every time you have eaten soul food at a restaurant, every time you have ordered fried chicken from a fast food chain, every time you have had macaroni and cheese at a potluck or sweet potato pie at Thanksgiving, or a bowl of gumbo in New Orleans, you have been eating the intellectual and creative output of Black women who were given no credit, no compensation, and no seat at the tables they set. This is not ancient history. The erasure continued well into the 20th century, and in many corners of the food industry, it continues today, which is exactly why conversations like this one matter, and why the people watching need to carry this knowledge forward. Black women chefs are still underrepresented in fine dining. Black food traditions are still too often described as comfort food or soul food in ways that imply they are lesser than the European culinary traditions that get called cuisine. The 10 foods Black women invented that changed everything are not a niche list. They are the list. They are American food. And the least we can do, any of us who have ever enjoyed a Sunday dinner or a piece of cornbread or a bowl of gumbo, is say their names, seek out the history, support Black women chefs and food entrepreneurs working today, and understand that the plate in front of us is never just food. It is a story. It is a legacy. It is proof that genius cannot be enslaved even when the person who possesses it can be. Drop a comment below and tell us which dish on this list surprised you the most. And tell us which Black woman chef or food writer you want us to cover in a future video. Because this history is deep and there are dozens of names that deserve their own spotlight. If you want to learn more about the Black women whose names got left off the recipes, subscribe right now, because we are going deeper into this history in our next video. Share this with someone who thinks they already know the history of American food, because most of us were never taught the full story, and it is past time we were. This knowledge belongs to everyone now. Stay sharp, stay hungry, and keep rising.